Welcome back to part 5 of my video series where I have a closer look at the music of Stephen Sondheim's 1979 musical Sweeney Todd. You're going to want to watch the first 4 parts. This is like any TV show, Breaking Bad or Game of Thrones. You can't just start in the middle of the series or else it won't make much sense. In this video, we'll have a look at Mrs. Lovett's first song, Worst Pies in London, which is a character song. Mrs. Lovett, unlike Sweeney Todd, is very energetic, jumping off the walls and bouncing from topic to topic. This is very much reflected in the music. In the beginning, one might describe it as containing large leaps, perhaps spontaneous, very patter-like. Sondheim really liked this song because it allowed Mrs. Lovett to do an assortment of actions to constantly disrupt her lines, while adding a bit of unevenness to the patter. Let's count the number of beats between the accents. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. And this pie, sir, is the longest duration note we've had so far. Probably written in order to emphasize that Mrs. Lovett is all about them pies. And after all these breaths and phrases, we finally get our first recognizable rhyme.
Do forgive me if my head's a little fake. What is that? But you think we are the plague?
But actually, the pie, sir, we had earlier ends up rhyming with try, sir, later on. Sondheim is all about them overarching rhyme patterns. The rhyme scheme in this is A-B-B-A-C-C.
Did you come in for a pie, sir? Do forgive me if my head's a little fake. What is that? But you think we are the plague? From the way that people keep affording, no you don't. Heaven knows I try, sir. But there's no one comes in even to inhale. Right you are, so would you like a drop of ale?
Now that the listener had heard the first rhyme scheme, Sondheim can come back to it and add more. Now it is A-B-B-C-C-A-D-D.
Mrs. Mooney has a pie shop. Does a business, but I've noticed something weird. Lately all the neighbors' cats have disappeared. I've to hand it to her, what I calls enterprise. Popping pussies into pies wouldn't do in my shop. Just the thought of it's enough to make you sick. And I'm telling you, them pussycats is quick.
This is also part of the whole Mrs. Lovett spontaneous characteristic. But anyways, Mrs. Lovett switches back to frantic pattering to gush romantic, lush, pretty lines.
So would you like a drop of ale? Mind you, I can't hardly blame them. These are probably the worst pies.
And on top of that, constantly switching to keys we're not expecting. I love this section when we're in this gorgeous section in the key of G flat. And from there he wants to go into the key of C. While looking at this keyboard, it is literally the furthest note from it, and also the least related key. This specific interval is called a tritone. The people in the Middle Ages and even up to the 18th, 19th century hated this interval because it sounded ugly, singing from one note to the other. It also seems restless because it seems to want to resolve to here or here. That is why this interval has been nicknamed the Devil's Interval. It is probably no coincidence that Sondheim decided to shift keys in the Devil's Interval because Sweeney is a devilish character. He is called a devil 3 times in the show, exclusively by the beggar woman. I mean, the word demon is in the title of the show, but I especially love how Sondheim goes from this key to the next. One of Mrs. Lovett's motif is the quick ascending phrase.
Frank, I thought you was a ghost. Half a minute, can't you sit you down, sit. All I meant is that I haven't seen a customer for weeks. Did you come in for a pie, sir?
Well, the opposite of that is slow descending phrase. And that's what we have in the bass. We start from the G flat and slowly descend. I'll highlight it for your listening convenience.
If you doubt it, take a bite. Is that just disgusting? You have to concede it. It's nothing but plastic. You drink this, you'll need it. The worst pies.
It lingers on this last note a bit. We don't know what's coming next until the melody catches up and we hear the ascending motif until we reach. Sondheim is really good at these key shifting things. There's a moment in another show of his, Company, that I really love too. Perhaps I should do a short video series on that show as well. Near the end of her song, her London parallels Anthony's London. I don't know what that really means, I just wanted to point it out. The very last thing I want to say about the song is the Dies Irae. Yep, that medieval hymn of death that I talked about in the first video and is prevalent through this musical. The first 4 notes of the Dies Irae, like the melodic outline of the song, has the same pitch movement.
Wait, what's your rush, what's your hurry?
A step of a second down, then a second back up, and then a leap of a third. The difference between the Dies Irae and this is that the first two steps in the Dies Irae are minor seconds instead of major seconds, and the last leap goes down instead of up. Even Mrs. Lovett in her first song has undertones of death and revenge. Even when she's no longer singing that Dies Irae outlined melody, it still follows her in the accompaniment.
Heaven knows I try, sir, but there's no one comes in even to inhale. Right you are, so would you like a drop of ale?
That's all for this video. For the next video, we're going to switch the order of the next two songs. So instead of covering Poor Thing first, we'll be looking at My Friends. Thank you.